Would you say this is a good time for women in the world, or is it job only half done, or not even that?
Look, this obviously is a good time for women generally when you think of where we've come from and where we are now. Is it enough? No, it's not enough, and we need to do more. I've just become a grandmother, so I've got a little granddaughter, and I'm looking and thinking, how can it be that today we still have this problem with equal pay, for example? And you know, the World Economic Forum has just predicted we won't get full equality between men and women for another 170 years. My granddaughter will be well gone by then, and yet when I started in the 70s as a young lawyer, you know, we just passed the Equal Pay Act. I thought all this was going to be solved by now.
But things have come a very long way since you started as a lawyer. Come on, I mean,
absolutely.
The pay inequalities and workplace inequalities have narrowed a lot, right?
They have narrowed, but we do appear to be stuck. We've got to a stage where we've improved, and yet we can't seem to get over that final hurdle.
What is the obstacle? I'm really interested in what it is that stops that final hurdle being dismantled. I mean, do you think it is? People talk about a kind of a male backlash going on at the moment, the election in the US. I mean, what do you think it is? Is it innate sexism in men, or is it something more complicated?
I think it is more complicated, and actually I believe that the vast majority of men are not sexist, that actually most men, you know, love their mothers, respect their wives, and are passionate about having the best opportunities for their daughters. The problem is we seem to have a culture which sort of shrugs its shoulders and say, oh well, men, you know, men, that's just the way they are. So for example, when we talk about development, and this is what my foundation does, and we get statistics which say that if you give a development dollar to a woman, 90 cents of that will be spent on others, and if you give the same development dollar to a man, it's 30 to 40%, and yet we still keep giving the money to projects which mainly are about men, and we don't give enough money to projects which help women take this agenda and push it forward, particularly in the economic sphere.
And that is what your foundation is, of course, aimed at. What is the difference between a man and a woman? Because some people say, look, men and women are basically the same.
Evan, do you not know the difference? I'm surprised.
But what is it? What is it that you think makes women in positions of responsibility different to the way they exercise power differently?
Well, I think it's partly to do with their different experiences, and actually it's also partly to do with diversity as a whole. You know, all of us are different, actually, and I'm not saying that all women are the same. But the difference of experiences, I think, really are quite key between men and women. You know, that we, you know, women who speak out are kind of regarded as pushy. Men who speak out are leaders and assertive. We see, I think, in relation to even little boys and little girls, that there are some differences from very early on. Girls tend to like to talk to each other and share things, whereas the boys tend to be sitting down, building things.
But are they born different, or is it all just the constructions of social conditioning that you think?
Well, we're all born differently.
On average, are men and women born slightly differently?
But I would hope so, actually, because actually I think that's the key to success. And one of the problems in our world is, if you like, is that we don't allow the differences to come together. And actually, when we do allow differences to come together, we actually get much more creative, more cooperative outcomes. So if only, as McKinsey reported, if only we allow women to have the equal access to the workplace as men, we're missing out on a $12 trillion opportunity. I mean, that's a huge amount of money. In sub-Saharan Africa, every year they're losing $95 billion simply because women aren't getting the same access to education, to health, to political power, and to economic power as men. And this is about the way we've devised society.
But women are, of course, doing the vast bulk of the mothering, aren't they? And a disproportionate amount of the rearing of children. Is that something to rejoice in, or do you think, in the kind of nirvana that you're aiming at, that women would probably be splitting that almost 50-50 with the dads?
I think we shouldn't be talking about mothering or fathering. We should be talking about parenting, and we should allow couples to actually be able to organise a way of bringing up their children that suits both of them. So I think that it's clear that obviously women physically give birth and they also physically feed the babies, and maternity leave and maternity rights are very important. But beyond that, what I think is very encouraging, particularly in my son's generation, is we see young men now who are much more hands-on fathers than their own fathers. And I have to say that my husband was much more a hands-on father than his own father, when the idea was that, you know, real men went to work and women stayed at home, and for a man to show caring was regarded as a weakness. I think we've gone beyond that today, and this is a good thing, but we still organise our work in such a way as though we were still living in this sort of mythical world where, you know, women all stayed at home and men went to work. I say mythical because in my own case, my mother had to work after my father left us. So, I mean, I was always brought up by a working mother. The difference between my mother and myself is that because she didn't have my education, you know, she didn't have the resources that I had, which enabled me to have a great career.
Does it make a difference to have role models in positions of responsibility? I mean, I am thinking here, Theresa May. Do you think that is a great statement to young women?
I absolutely think that role models are so important. One of the reasons I became a lawyer myself was because my grandma was a great admirer of Rose Howbron, the first QC, and she was a girl from Liverpool who became a lawyer, and I felt that if she could do it, so could I. But, you know, I know Ellen Johnson Sirleaf very well, the first woman to be elected the president of an African country. And she told me, Liberia, she told me a great story once about how shortly after she'd been elected, she went on a visit with a dignitary. Believe me, I've been on those visits. And they went round a primary school. After a bit, some of the children were getting a little bit restless. And the male teacher spoke rather sharply to them. And this little 8-year-old girl piped up and said, "Sir, be careful how you speak to me, because one day I might be president." And Ellen said she was so thrilled because before she was elected, no little girl in Africa could think that a woman could be president. And now at least this little girl had thought that a president actually could be female.
And of course in Britain, we've had 2 women prime ministers, which is ahead of the curve, I think it's fair to say. What's going on there though? Why are they both Tory prime ministers and not Labour? What's going on the left of politics? Is that a bit too macho, do you think? Or is it just the small numbers?
I would love to see a woman Labour Prime Minister. But, you know, in the end, man or woman, the most important thing is what they do when they become Prime Minister and the sort of policies that they have which enables them to not just help women, but actually to help men too. So
there was going to be this sort of golden moment, wasn't there, when Hillary Clinton, Angela Merkel and Theresa May were going to be 3 of the G7 leaders at the same time. I'm sure you were wishing that outcome. It didn't happen. Do you think, what was the obstacle there? Do you think that was that a sexism thing? Was that a male backlash? Because that in a way encapsulates quite a lot of the sort of glass ceiling feelings I think women have.
Well, of course, you know, I personally was obviously sad not to see Hillary Clinton win. I mean, that would hardly surprise you, would it? But, you know, I think we can't just focus on the individual personalities. It's about, you know, what is it that enables women to get to the top? And there does appear to be some kind of backlash. And what I fear is that we've rather given permission for people to say things, which I thought that we'd stopped giving that permission. And I'm a lawyer, and when I think of what's happened in my lifetime, I've seen Sex Discrimination Act, Equal Pay Act, we've seen equality for gays, for, you know, age discrimination, all of this. And I'm not saying that these laws necessarily change what people think, but what they do is create a space, a public space, where things that are frankly unacceptable are not said. And what seems to be a shame at the moment is we are getting things which are unacceptable, which are being said, and being said by people who frankly should know better. And I think that's a bad thing.
But this is a very interesting time, and there are lots of people who are, well, let's call them the sort of the old liberal elite, who really feel that it's the end of an era, and let's be honest, that you and your husband were kind of cheerleaders for. And I wonder whether you feel that sort of sense of depression, that basically that era of New Labour it's all gone. It's even been unwound. I mean, it's a sort of curtains coming down on what was a good run, but it's somehow coming to an end.
I don't accept that.
No.
Maybe I'm just a eternal optimist. The glass is always half full, not half empty. But I don't think that we are going to see people turning their backs on the open-minded, tolerant society, which we are so proud of that we have here in Britain. And you know, this is something worth fighting for. And so there's no point being depressed about it. We have to assert that what is right and what is kind and the good things that happen in our society, and not allow those with loud voices who, often talking in these echo chambers that are the internet, come around and try and pretend that everybody thinks like them. Actually, there's still a huge number of people who like the kind of society that just allows people to be themselves and to fulfill their potential. That's why it's so important, the work we do with women's economic empowerment in my foundation, because across the world, as you said, we are so lucky here, really. When you think of the countries we work in, whether it's in the Middle East or in Africa or in Asia, where the opportunities for women are so much more limited, where women are told the whole time what they can't do, and where we try with our 3 C's, which is to build up women's confidence, to help build up their capacity, and to give them access to capital, we try and make sure that women get those opportunities which they deserve, not just for their own sake, but actually for the sake of the entire society. Because if men and women can each fulfill their potential, we all benefit.
And there's a lot of evidence for that. I mean, you mentioned the foundation. I mean, I'm going to ask this sort of awkward question. In the States, Hillary Clinton somehow got portrayed as crooked Hillary. And it clearly had some sway with some voters, not most voters, but some voters. And there was something around a Clinton, a foundation, and lots of money. Now, I want to put it to you that in this country, there's something of the same whiff around the Blair brand. There's a foundation, or 2 foundations, yours and your husband's, and there's lots of money. And there's clearly a lot of people are just not listening to what you and your husband are going to say, because they think there's something about crooked Tony, basically. I just wonder whether you acknowledge that there's that feeling around the Blair name. Why you think there's that the intensity of feeling around that, and whether it hurts.
Well, I'm very proud of the Blair name, and I would say that my own foundation, in fact, is very much complies with the Charity Commission. We have, I am neither, though I'm the founder, I am neither a trustee nor an employee of the foundation. So I do not have decision-making powers within my foundation. My foundation has just published its accounts, and everyone can see that our administrative costs are 12%, which is well under the 15% Charity Commission recommendation. And we do everything we can to ensure that our money that we raise goes to the women's projects that we do.
But that's, in a way, that enhances the mystery of why. I mean, there's just a sort of enormous kind of anger about the Blairs, and even in Parliament today they're discussing, should Tony Blair be being inquest into whether he misled Parliament. I mean, what is going on? Is it just because you raised a lot of money after you left Downing Street, or is it the legacy of Iraq? It doesn't feel like it's all to do with Iraq. I just wonder what on earth it is.
Well, I think that, as I said before, I'm very proud of my husband. He's actually quite capable of standing up and speaking for himself, and I think that you should probably ask him about this. But talking about my foundation and what we do, I don't think we find criticism of the work we do, actually. In fact, I think, to be fair, I get pretty good press about the work of the foundation, and I'm very proud of that.
Yeah. I'm not going to dwell on your husband. This is an interview about women, so the last thing we're going to do is get you in here saying, tell us about your husband.
I was going to say, why is it? Here we are talking about women and how their vital role in the world, and what you want to do is ask me about my husband. Shame on
I've
you.
given you plenty of time to talk about women. Obviously, your husband is an interesting guy.
He is an interesting guy, of course.
Did you give him any advice about the so-called return to the front line in politics? He was clever enough to know he's not going to become Prime Minister, he's not going to stand for elected office. He's too controversial for that, bluntly. But did you talk to him about this idea of maybe trying to take a little bit more of a backseat fixing role in terms of re-establishing the centre ground in British politics?
Well, I am absolutely passionate, as Tony is, in making sure that the centre ground, which is where most people are, is properly represented in our politics. And I'm delighted that Tony is setting up his institute and wants to establish more thought around these issues. And I'm telling you what I did tell him, that part of this has to be how we tackle making sure that women make their equal contribution to what's going on in the world.
Cherie Blair, thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.